Now this is part 2 of my presentation, and this time, whereas the first part I talked about the role of the educationist, the teacher, now I want to talk about the scholar activist. Now, I came back to Malaysia and I began to teach in a university. Now I've continued to play this role as teacher with much responsibility. I taught contemporary Southeast Asian politics, especially Malaysian politics, in University Science Malaysia in Penang. For more than 50 years, I've kept abreast of developments and debates in my field. I aspired to become excellent in my work. I read lots, conducted my own research, wrote and did analysis, published and shared my ideas with others, especially my students and my peers. My period teaching in USM coincided with the transformation of the university system in Malaysia. Initially, in the 1950s and 1960s, few Malaysians had the opportunity to attend university. It was elitist. By the year 2000, a rapid expansion of the number of students and universities had occurred. Alas, the recruitment and training of academics to teach, academicians to teach in these additional universities did not keep up with that increase in students and institutions. Massification or democratization of education is very good, but we must also strive for excellence and maintain high academic standards. Standards have declined in Malaysia, and many do not seem to care. So we end up compromising the education of the young. We should be providing excellence, not mediocrity. Second, the academic culture, which had put a premium on the search for knowledge, for transmitting that knowledge effectively, and for the application of that knowledge for the good of society, has also been displaced. In its place is a hybrid of corporate and bureaucratic culture. The adoption of neoliberal economic policies, namely privatization and corporatization in Malaysia, beginning from the late 1980s, led to the related adoption of market-driven policies to manage universities too. With corporatization, universities had to find new sources of income. So many resorted to increasing the intake of local and foreign students, especially at the postgraduate level. Professional commercial courses in fields like management, economics, commerce, accountancy, mass communications, applied engineering, IT, fields which have a practical component, were introduced and promoted. Invariably, it resulted in the sidelining of the humanities and social sciences. The departments of philosophy, history, literature, the performing arts, anthropology, sociology, the fine arts, they are struggling to survive these days. So the expansion of the universities and numbers of students did not lead to an uptick and surge in creativity and critical perspectives among the young. Instead, that age-old search for knowledge took an uncritical, technocratic turn. Number 3, there also occurred increased political controls over staff and students, and the interference in the running of the universities by the government. A coercive law was passed in Parliament to curb student rights and to disallow them from forming autonomous student unions in the early 1970s. The academic staff was similarly subjected to curbs and restrictions. As well, the campuses were securitized by fencing all of them up, employing full-time security guards to monitor student activities under the charge of a deputy vice-chancellor, specially appointed to be in charge of, quote, student affairs. This led to a culture of fear and political apathy. The universities was transformed from centers of the search for knowledge, for truth, transformed into just another government department. In summary, the teacher, professor in the university was challenged to ensure that the universities provided excellence, not mediocrity, for the next generation, to produce creative and critical students, even dreamers and idealists, and not be overwhelmed by the demand to produce technocrats and pragmatic problem solvers. Plus, to ensure that the application of knowledge by the universities would be for the good of society, not for the elites or those in power. I've tried to be guided by these ends during this period of transformation of the Malaysian universities. I want to switch gear a bit and talk about how the scholar can also be a scholar activist and serve the wider society outside the universities. In fact, there's more that the teacher-educator can do. As I said, the pursuit of knowledge in the university must be directed towards the betterment of society, not to safeguard the position of those in power. He or she can be a scholar activist, sometimes also referred to as a public intellectual. In essence, the public intellectual and scholar activist is prepared to comment on the issue of the day and to critique those in power whensoever necessary. My own formation as a scholar activist benefited from mentoring from two intellectual giants while I was in Cornell University in America, Professor George Cahin and Professor Benedict Anderson were intellectual giants in the study of Southeast Asian politics, but they were both also involved in linking their scholarship to politics, in the sense that they were not unprepared to speak out to the public and to lobby the US government to change its policies vis-a-vis Southeast Asian leaders, Southeast Asian countries, which they studied, researched, and wrote about. Put simply, Cahin played a prominent role in challenging the US war in Vietnam. He used to be involved in teachings in campuses all over the country. He went to the State Department, to Pentagon, to lobby these people about their policies in Vietnam. Anderson lobbied against the Indonesian invasion of East Timor and the massacre of 500,000 people in Indonesia in the aftermath of the 1965 coup, and in 1976 as well, when actually a democratic government in Bangkok in Thailand had been displaced by a coup d'etat. So he did these kinds of things, and I was in America at that point in time, and I saw them combine their scholarship with this kind of intellectual activism. Now let me talk about the multi-ethnic, multi-religious organization that I've been involved in for the past 30 years. I was secretary of Aliran for 20 years and then its president for 5 years, 2011-2015. I continue to be involved in the EXCO and to write for the organization. Founded in Penang, 1977, Aliran regards itself as an reform organization that's principally concerned with social education. So it organized forums, issued press statements, publications, books, cassettes, and for 33 years it published something called the Aliran Monthly. The ferment of the 80s culminated with a big operation Lalang 1987 to arrest, and where they arrested more than 106 opposition leaders, critics, social activists. They were detained under the then draconian Internal Security Act, which allows for detention without trial. Apart from these arrests, several newspapers were closed. The then Chief Justice, head of the judiciary, and several Supreme Court judges were also sacked. There occurred amendments to tighten the existing coercive laws and the Constitution, and to curtail public involvement in politics and to snuff out existing democratic spaces. Arguably, the Aliran Monthly, during this pre-IT era, before the arrival of online dailies, we documented these major events and the follow-up developments very closely, more than any other media outlets, because a lot of the newspapers which were then in publication were actually owned by the ruling political parties. Now, with the arrival of the online dailies and social media, the role of our sale of our magazine dropped significantly. Consequently, we had to set up our own website and embarked on a process of digitalizing the Aliran Monthly, so to enhance our reach out into society. We, however, continue to carry analytical essays in our webpage. Not just news reports, but analytical essays which discuss the major trends in Malaysia's politics, as the Aliran Monthly used to do. On my part, I've published a few hundred critical essays on political developments and other current affairs in Malaysia over these past five decades that I've been involved with Aliran. Or was it 4 decades? This popular writing for the Aliran Monthly was done in the midst of my role as a university teacher and academic researcher. I believe that an intellectual in a developing society like Malaysia must always be sensitive to current issues, be prepared to analyze them carefully, and be critical of those in power whensoever necessary. So I've alternated between writing research-based academic pieces and short critical essays about current affairs in Malaysia. Each has fed into the other. For although there's very little time to conduct much research when writing the short essays on current affairs due to deadlines, nonetheless, I've always double-checked my facts as a good academic should. I've also drawn upon social theories that I've been exposed to and analytical skills which I've honed as an academician. As a result of my many years of social science training, often these popular essays are elaborated on subsequently after additional research and reflected upon theoretically in order to transform them into academic type pieces. I've also pruned away the theoretical parts and academic jargon contained in my academic pieces so that the major points are conveyed in a more accessible language for ordinary Malaysians. Put another way, there's no clear divide between my popular writings and my more academic pieces because I decided to relate one to the other. I do believe that I'm a more thoughtful scholar today precisely because I'm connected to these everyday current affairs via my involvement in Aliran and my writing for the Aliran Monthly and now the website. Now, one of the downsides of the new IT, especially social media, is that many students nowadays do not read long articles, let alone prepare long assignments anymore. They might keep abreast of developments in all kinds of themes and topics, but their grasp of these kinds of topics and themes are sometimes very superficial. Worse, because it is so easy for all kinds of people to post and repost materials, there's also a lot of fake news and disinformation out there, as we saw in the case of the American election, the run-up to American elections, Trump's period. There's a lot of fake news, disinformation out there. I believe that it's vitally important then for the scholar activists to engage in the popular discourses which occurs in the websites and social media nowadays. The scholar activists must help not just our students but the general public out there to distinguish between real and fake news, good versus poor analysis of a situation. But do not forget that his background is also in scholarship. He has to return to conduct the heavy-duty, research analysis. We must be prepared to continue to produce academic pieces, long books, but not neglect, also putting out the short pieces for popular consumption to combat the fake news, disinformation out there. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed part 1 and part 2. Thank you. Bye-bye.